So I'm sure you've heard a lot about Garfield Lake and the history of the lake. We want to spend some time with you today to tell you about the history of the lake, help separate fact from fiction. We've invited Mike Wilczynski here with us today, and you'll hear from him. And then at the end of this video, you'll hear some things about what to expect next. What's going to happen with the lake, what should we expect as residents, and what are the questions we should be asking of our city leaders. So we moved here about 8 years ago, and it was absolutely beautiful. The lake, the swimming, the boating, the wildlife, and that all changed in 2019 and 2020 when the lake levels went down quite a bit, which is right about the same time the city of Novi started the 9-mile sewer project. That project called for billions of gallons of water to be withdrawn from the ground, and as a result, we saw lake levels at Garfield Lake drop between 6 to 8 feet in most places and about 10 to 15 feet in others. Wetlands were drying up, wildlife stopped coming around, and we used to be able to kayak down in our wetlands. And as you can see behind us, our kayaks are now sitting on the banks, not able to be used. So we've got lots of fallen trees, and we can't make full use of our land and our pond anymore. So you might say, Remco, what have you guys done? So as early as March of 2020, we contacted the city, specifically Peter Auger and Ben Croy, with concerns of dropping lake levels. But we were ignored. It fell on deaf ears. There was only a couple of us, mainly Jim, and we fell on deaf ears. It wasn't until more neighbors around the lake started to complain about the water levels that we started to gain some traction. The city of Novi, right around July 1st of 2020, agreed to put a 6-inch hose in the lake that you see behind me. And this is after us joining many city council meetings, making public comments, and bringing this to the attention of our city leaders. Once the 6-inch pipe was put in, lake levels increased about 3 feet, still about 4 or 5 feet below normal. And the city is now working to install a 12-inch pipe that you also see behind me into the lake to pump more water here, which is water that was diverted towards Island Lake. Now, we question whether or not this is because of our request or because the residents at Terra at the end of Garfield Road and 9 Mile have flooded backyards and are living practically in a swamp.
My name is Jim, like you said. I started contacting the city in the spring of 2019. I reached out first to Peter Auger, next to Ben Croy, left multiple messages, never really heard back from either. It was a couple weeks after where I started joining city council meetings just to kind of get everything on the record. We had asked for some plans as far as what's going to happen with the lake and how they're going to be able to fix everything. And when we were asking for that, we were also asking to make sure that the state wetlands just across the street from where I live would also be taken care of. Dave Stout, Mayor Pro Temp Dave Stout, contacted Remco and I directly, asked to come out and see our property. We thought we were going to make some headway, and instead we were just told keep our mouths shut. The wetlands are nothing more than sticks and mud, and we should just trust the city and they're going to take care of everything. That's been almost a year, and so far we've received nothing in terms of plans, no short-term solutions, no long-term solutions, just a lot of hold on, wait, and trust us, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, so in May of 2021, we had our first community meeting. Now, this community meeting was set up by the city of Novi in response to the what I would call is our guerrilla social media campaign. We started to gain a presence on Facebook and on Nextdoor. So the city agreed to set up a community meeting. That was likely, in my 25 years in business, one of the worst meetings I have ever attended. We actually received an apology letter for the behavior of Mr. Peter Auger at the end of that meeting. During the second meeting in June of 21, it was much of the same, although I was not present there. I heard the entire meeting. But Mayor Bob Gatt did say that the city would make it right for anyone who's been impacted by the 9-mile sewer project. But when we asked for specifics, none were provided. There's damage done to the lake banks, there's damage done to the canals, there's damage done to the wetlands, there's bank cave-ins, and there's sediment deposits in the lake that we are not even, been made aware of. You know, on the personal level, we continue to feel bullied, minimized, and lied to, and dismissed by each one of our interactions we've had and that we continue to have with city officials. We feel it's a matter of time before either Jim or myself, because we are the most outspoken, before we'll get targeted by code enforcement, some other sort of city inspection. So it's a very stressful time for us. Like I said, I feel it's important that everybody hears the same facts and recommendations and separate it from fiction, because there's a lot of emotion here. So I also want to align us on next steps, what to expect, what to ask for, and what we think is going to happen. So to help get us there, we've requested the professional insights of Mike Wilczynski, an experienced certified geologist with more than 40 years of experience. So we'll introduce him here in just a moment.
Here is Mike Wilczynski, over 40 years experience as a professional hydrogeologist with Pangea Environmental LLC. Mike, could you just tell us some of your qualifications?
Yeah, I'm Mike Wilczynski. I'm a certified professional geologist with Pangea Environmental LLC. I have over 40 years of experience, mostly in hydrogeology, both in the private sector, working for oil companies and mining companies, as a consultant, and also as a regulator for the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality.
So, would you be able to confirm that we haven't tried to steer you in any way, and what the information you're providing is strictly based on your professional opinion?
Everything is just based on fact, available information that I looked at.
Yeah, Mike, so as residents, we have very little of knowledge of environmental issues, right? So how they arise, how they can be remediated. In your own opinion, what do you think caused the water level at Garfield Lake to drop so significantly? And how do you think any of the damage to the wetland has occurred? What's the reason for that?
Okay. Based on information I looked at, it's caused by the dewatering or lowering of the water table to allow for the construction of the 9-mile sewer.
So, Mike, how do you believe that this could have been avoided? Was there information or studies that could have been utilized, and if so, could they have led to a different approach to the 9-mile sewer project by the city of Novi?
There's geologic maps. There's a geologic map of Oakland County that shows that you're going to be on glacial moraine or glacial till material, and this is characterized by material having boulders, and that is why they're having the standstills and the work stoppages and the slow progress. And that's a published map that was readily available. Also, the topographic maps and just the driving the surrounding area, you see the wetlands, you know there's indications of shallow groundwater, and that any dewatering down to the depth that they want, 30 feet or so, you should have some impact on the surrounding wetlands and lakes. That should have been noted, and it wasn't.
So Mike, so you mentioned there's readily available information available. So have you looked at that? And having looked at that, would you have arrived at a different decision if you were to manage that project, the 9-mile sewer project?
I would have been very cautious of going forward with it in the manner that they have. It took me about 2 hours looking at the available information to see red flags. This isn't a very complicated issue. This is something that I could have used as a lab exercise in an intro geology class that I used to teach.
And normally in a project like this, you would have expected that the city would have consulted with the hydrogeologist. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would have expected a geologist to have looked at this before proceeding with a project like this, yes.
Okay.
So Mike, you've made a comment in the past that it seems that the dewatering might have impacted an area that includes a contaminated site. What's the risk when the impact of dewatering activities reaches a contaminated site?
Okay. Yes, the area of influence from the dewatering has reached out close to Mayberry Lake or into Mayberry State Park. And there's, in that area, some known sites of contamination. The locations are on readily available information, but it's not, there's no detail about the site, the contamination, or if it's groundwater or soil, or which direction the groundwater is moving, so I can't get any other additional information on it. But it's within the area of influence of where the pumping, the dewatering, is starting to pull groundwater or change the groundwater flow direction. And that could impact the way the contaminated plumes behave.
I see. We've frequently seen, and we've posted it on Facebook, that the water coming out of the pipe is very dark brown, like a chocolate color. And the city's telling us it's either suspended solids or turbidity. Can you tell us what that is? And can you tell us, when there's high levels of that in the water coming into an environment, what happens to that ecosystem?
Okay. Suspended solids is nothing more than very fine-grained material, clay and silt-sized material that's suspended in the water column and stays suspended for a long period of time. When it enters into a lake, you can start changing the type of lake bottom you have. If you had a sandy lake bottom, you could change it to a silty clay type clay bottom. You start changing the type of benthic organisms that live in the lake. You're going to change the color of the lake because of the turbidity. It's going to change the temperature and start influencing the oxygen content. So it has a chain reaction on the whole ecosystem.
Mike, you were at the last meeting held at the end of June. You heard a lot of residents asking for the city to stop the project. Do you think that's a good idea? And if so, or if not, why?
They're so far into it at this point, they need to continue the project.
So at the last city meeting, the mayor stood up in front of the crowd and said not to worry, that the city's provided clear direction to right any wrongdoings incurred by residents as a result of this project. But as I said before, there were no specifics about what that actually meant. So when we talk about water levels, what damage do you think is done and what type of remediation should be included?
By dropping the water levels, you just possibly have destroyed the entire ecosystem. If you look at this lake with all the algae growing on it, I understand that wasn't the condition prior to the dewatering. And you're changing the temperature, the dissolved oxygen, as I said previously. You really can't tell right now what the damage has been done to the ecosystem, the wildlife, and the vegetation.
And do you think that as part of the remediation, getting the water back in the lake should be the first priority?
That would be the first one, getting the water levels up as soon as possible. As a rule of thumb, it generally takes almost as long or about as long for water levels to return back to prior static levels or the original levels after pumping has stopped as it did to lower the levels originally. So we've been pumping here for over 2 years now, and so we're looking at possible 2 years for total restoration of the water levels. Yes, lowering the water levels is going to cause bank erosion. It's also going to cause vegetation to start growing on the bank. So when the water level rises, you start having things like this 3 foot of vegetation growing in an area where the water is going to come back up to. And so there's a lot of issues. Bank erosion is definitely one of them.
And then my last part of my question is, again, any damage or remediation that has been done to wells, foundations, driveways, people's homes as a result of dewatering. Have you seen that happen? And then what could be the type of remediation to fix those things?
Yeah, I haven't seen that happen here, but it is a possibility. I've seen it happen in other places where water levels change. By drying out soils, you can start changing the amount of compaction or how the clays behave, and you could have differential settling between parts of structures. Rising water levels can do the same thing if they come up too high. So there can be some structural damage. None has been reported so far, but that's something that the city should be looking at or cognizant of occurring so that they can look for it, or if people start filing complaints, the city realizes that could be the result of what they're doing here.
Great, thank you.
Mike, it seems to be inevitable that the city is going to continue development projects over the next couple of years. What can they do to ensure something like this that happened with Garfield Lake and the surrounding area? What can the city do to ensure that this doesn't happen again in the future?
They need to be more environmentally conscious in all of their projects. Anything that involves any construction should have an environmental professional look at it. They have done this, but as far as I know, they've only had ecological consultants look at projects, never a hydrogeologist, or at least not on this project. When I talked to OHM, they told me they didn't have a geologist on staff.
You know, what should be our next steps as far as the damage that has already been done?
I think
residents' next steps.
I think you need to put pressure on the city officials to start tracking complaints and following up on them, and having more transparency to the process and people filing complaints. They need to be told more than just give me a phone call when there's a community meeting. There needs to be some way of tracking these and people getting follow-up information.
So are there things that we should look out for? If water levels don't rise by a certain amount, if the banks continue to erode, if fish start to float on top of the water, are there things we should be watching for once the project's complete?
I think the city should provide you with a restoration plan. How long they expect it to take for the water levels to recover, what they're going to do to reestablish the ecosystem here, to take care of terrestrial vegetation or land vegetation that's now in the bottom of ponds, things such as that.
Okay, so really a holistic plan about the wetlands, the lake levels, the banks, the foundations, the wells, kind of all the things we have talked about, instead of just on a one-off basis.
Yes, plus loss of use.
Okay, well, so thanks, Mike. We really appreciate it. Appreciate you being out here, answering our questions. Look forward to continue to work with you. Look forward to, getting this out to our viewers out on the interwebs. And, if there's any questions, please feel free to post them, and we'll be more than happy to have a qualified professional answer them for you.
I can be reached at Pangea52yahoo.com.